Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Neilson, and I'm one of the Generative HSE team of consultants, but I haven't always been a consultant. Prior to joining with Generative HSE, I spent 40 years with BlueScope Steel, formerly BHP, as an operations supervisor and manager. Some of you may know that BlueScope Steel Port Kembla Works has a reputation as one of the safest steelworks in the world, but it wasn't always that way. In fact, prior to a change of focus by management in the early 90s, BlueScope Steel had a lost time injury frequency rate in the mid-20s. At the time I left in 2009, the lost time injury frequency rate had been reduced to 0.7. The medically treated injury frequency rate and all injury rate were also significantly improved. I have compiled a series of presentations based on the learnings gained from my experiences and safety journey with BlueScope Steel. The presentations concentrate on many of the behaviours required from frontline leaders and managers if an organisation is to have a world-class safety performance. Today, I want to take a bit of time to briefly tell you about my work history and why safety is important to me, as well as give you a degree of understanding about what you can expect from the presentation series. As I said earlier, my background is not that of a safety professional. I'm an operator. I left school at the age of 17 to start a metallurgy cadetship with BHP. I spent the first few years working in the laboratories, but by the last year of my cadetship, I had come to the realisation that if I wanted to go anywhere in BHP, I would need to make the jump to production. At that time, BHP were nearing the completion of building a new basic oxygen steelmaking plant, BOS for short. I applied for and was lucky enough to be offered a position there. I started at the BOS early 1972, approximately 2 months before it was commissioned. Once the plant started operating, I went on shift as the most junior of the staff officers in the plant. I was the relief of the lower relief. Most of the other staff officers had been drawn from other steelmaking plants at Port Kembla and knew the basics of steelmaking. They just had to learn how to use the new equipment. As I had come out of the labs, I had to learn the process as well. Over the next few years, as the BOS geared up to full production and more people were required to operate it, I rose through the ranks. By 1976, at the age of 24, I was what was called a pit foreman. The pit foreman was in charge of steel ladle preparation and the pouring of the liquid steel into ingots. I had a crew of about 18 people working for me, most of who didn't have English as a first language and some who didn't speak it at all. Around the same time as I became pit foreman, BHP started to build another new plant called a slab caster. In late 1977, I was asked if I wanted to join the team at the slab caster as one of the commissioning foremen. I started at the slab caster early 1978 and spent the next year learning about casting, how to operate the plant, and finally commissioned it in November of 1978. I actually opened the first ladle of steel cast at Port Kembla. Once the plant was up and running, I went on shift as one of the 4 original machine foremen, looking after the casting of the liquid steel. Over the next few years, I worked my way up to what was called a shift general foreman. That meant I had responsibility for all sections of the caster on shift. In the mid-80s, BHP decided to expand the caster and build 2 more casting machines. Again, I was fortunate enough to be asked if I wanted to be part of the commissioning team. So in early 1986, I joined the number 2 casting commissioning team. I travelled to Japan to learn about the new plant, returned to Australia and wrote all the initial standing procedures, then trained the operator in operating the new plant prior to commissioning. This time I didn't open the first ladle cast, I gave the order to open it. After the plant was successfully commissioned, I stayed on day shift to help with teething problems and never returned to shift work. In 1989, I was placed in charge of the tundish area of the caster. Basically, the tundish is a refractory lined vessel that acts as a distributor and performs the function of linking the ladle of liquid steel supplied by the BOS to the casting machine. In 1991, I was offered my first managerial position as caster services superintendent, looking after all the support functions the caster required. Caster services was comprised of 3 totally different areas and about 45 people, most of whom were on shift work. In 1998, the caster services superintendent's position was amalgamated with the steel treatment superintendent's position, and I became the steel treatment and caster service manager, with about 120 people working for me, a position I held until I left the steelworks. That's a brief rundown of my life at Port Kembla Steelworks, but it doesn't explain my interest in safety, so I'll try and explain to you why safety is important to me. In 1976, I was your typical 24-year-old. You know the type, 10 foot tall and bulletproof. I had a good job, I was earning good money, I was fit as a fiddle playing first grade rugby for a local team, I was driving a fast car and generally enjoying my life. In the 70s and 80s, the staff on shift would often go for a beer together after night shift before going home to sleep. On the 18th of September 1976, about the same time I walked through the front door of the Harp Hotel in Wollongong, a man was killed at work. Bill, the first person on the scene and the person who held his hand whilst he died, was the foreman that relieved me so I could go for that beer. If it happened 20 to 30 minutes earlier, it would have been one of my own people that was killed. It had a profound effect on me. I was no longer 10 foot tall and bulletproof. I saw what it did to Bill. Bill was a few years older than me, and he was one of the foremen who mentored me in steel making and supervision when I first joined the BOS. I learned a lot from him. He was someone I could always turn to if I needed advice, but he was never the same man after this incident. It made me think about what we missed. What were we doing wrong? From that time on, I tried to make sure all my people went home at the end of the day in the same condition they came to work, but I didn't know what I was doing, and my bosses weren't much help because they didn't know either. When I first became a superintendent, I thought having 4 lost time injuries a year was doing a good job. It was certainly a lot better than some of my peers. Then in the early 90s, BHP decided to get serious about safety. There had been another fatality on site. There was a change in focus, and it was driven by the boardroom. They brought in some ex-managers from plants, no steelworks amongst them, with good safety records and an understanding of how to manage safety to coach and mentor us. These ex-managers had lots of sayings or buzzwords. You probably know a few of them. Lead by example, don't walk past, visual leadership, just to name a few. But there was one I recall annoyed me, and it was, you get the level of safety performance you demonstrate you want. What a load of rubbish. Wasn't I Jim Neilson? Didn't I push safety at every opportunity? Didn't I always score well on safety and performance appraisal time? I certainly wasn't happy with the level of performance I was getting. But as I listened to and learnt from these ex-managers, I gradually began to understand that I may have been doing a lot of talking, but not a lot of demonstrating. I took my understanding of demonstrating to a whole new level. So first, I began to change my own behaviour, then I coached and mentored my direct reports in changing theirs. Remember I said when I first became a superintendent, I was having 4 lost time injuries a year? By the time I left the steelworks, the best I'd achieved was in excess of 7 years lost time injury free. And that was with 3 times the original workforce. Slab making, which my section was a part of, went over 7 million hours lost time injury free. Some of the hazards we had to deal with included liquid metal at 1600 degrees, mobile equipment, overhead cranes, gases, confined spaces, working at heights, electricity, hydraulics, lots and lots of manual handling. In this series of presentations, I may not mention the word demonstrate all that much, but they are all examples of what demonstration now means to me. Each of the presentations concentrates on one aspect of building a culture that will deliver world-class performance. Examples from actual events are used to illustrate and emphasise points made in the presentations. Organisations that aspire to world-class safety performance must have leaders that demonstrate their desire to get there and an unwavering commitment to reaching their goal. Thank you.